I want you to be able to say that day that I did try in my life to clothe the naked.
The name Paul Winfield grabs your attention right away because it brings to mind a man who left a mark on the world with his talent. If you have ever watched movies or TV shows from the 1970s and 1980s, you probably know him from something like Sounder, where he played a struggling father with so much heart it made people cry. Or maybe you remember him from The Terminator, where he had a smaller part but still stood out because he had this way of making every role feel real. He was born in 1939 in Los Angeles and grew up in a time when things were not easy for a black man trying to make it in acting. Back then there were not many roles for people who looked like him, and he had to fight for every chance he got. But he had this quiet strength about him, a kind of dignity that showed in everything he did on screen. So when you hear his name in a story about something unspoken, something he kept to himself, it makes you stop and wonder, what could a man like Paul Winfield, who seemed so open in his work, be hiding? That question alone pulls you in because it feels like there is a secret waiting to be found, something that might change how you see him. Paul Winfield was not just any actor, he was someone who lived through a lot and still came out shining. He grew up in a tough neighborhood, and his early life was full of challenges. His mom was a seamstress, and he did not have a dad around much, so money was tight. But even as a kid he loved stories, and he found a way to tell them through acting. He started doing plays in school and people noticed how good he was. Later he went to college and studied theater, which was a big deal because not many people from his background got that chance back then. He worked hard to get better, always pushing himself to be the best he could be. By the time he started getting noticed in Hollywood, he had already done a ton of stage work, showing he was not afraid to put in the effort. That hard work paid off when he got nominated for an Oscar for Sounder in 1973. It was a huge moment because it showed the world he was not just good, he was one of the best. But even with all that success, you wonder what was going on inside his head. Did he feel like he had made it, or was he always looking over his shoulder waiting for something to go wrong? The thing about Paul Winfield is that he carried himself with a kind of mystery. He was not loud or flashy like some actors, he was more thoughtful, more private. You could see it in his eyes when he acted. There was always something deeper, something he was not saying out loud. That makes the idea of an unspoken truth about his last role even more interesting. What could a man like him, who seemed so in control, be keeping to himself? Was it something about the role itself, or something about his life at the time? He passed away in 2004 from a heart attack, and his last movie came out around then, so you have to think about what was going on in his final days. Was he sick and nobody knew? Or was there something about that last project that hit him hard, something he did not want to share with the world? The more you think about it, the more questions pop up, and that is what makes this story so gripping. You want to know what was behind that quiet smile of his, what he was holding back when he could have said so much. Paul Winfield's life was full of moments that make you curious about who he really was. He was not just an actor, he was a trailblazer, someone who broke doors open for other black actors to follow. But that kind of role comes with a lot of weight. People looked up to him, expected him to be perfect, and you wonder if that ever got to him. Did he feel like he had to carry everyone else's dreams, or was he just trying to live his own? He never talked much about his personal life in interviews, which makes you think he liked to keep things close to his chest. He was in a long-term relationship with a man named Charles Gillen, who passed away a couple of years before Paul did, and you wonder how that loss affected him. Losing someone you love can change you, and maybe that had something to do with why he stayed quiet about his last role. Or maybe it was something else entirely, something about the movie itself that made him want to keep it to himself. The name Paul Winfield in this story pulls you in because it promises a look at a man who was so much more than what we saw on screen. The thing about Paul Winfield is that he had this way of making you feel like you knew him, even though he did not let many people get too close. His roles were so real, so full of feeling, that you felt like you were watching a piece of his soul. But now hearing about an unspoken truth makes you realize there was more to him than we ever got to see. Maybe he had fears or doubts he never told anyone about, or maybe he had dreams that never came true. The first part of this story, his name alone, sets up a puzzle you want to solve, because it is about a man who lived a big life but kept some of the biggest parts hidden. It makes you think about what he might have been feeling in those last days, what might have been going through his mind when he worked on that final film. Was he looking back on everything he had done, or was he just trying to get through one more job? The name Paul Winfield hooks you because it is not just about fame or movies, it is about a person who had a story to tell, but chose to keep some of it locked away, and now all you can do is wonder why. The word unspoken in the title hits you like a whisper in a quiet room. It makes you lean in closer because it feels like something big is being held back. When you hear unspoken, you think of secrets, things left unsaid, stuff that might change everything if it came out. With Paul Winfield, this word takes on a whole new weight, because he was someone who seemed so real, so honest in his work. You watch him in movies like Sounder, or even smaller roles like in The Terminator, and you feel like he is giving you everything he has got. So when you hear there is something unspoken about his last role, it grabs you tight and does not let go. What could a man like him, who poured so much into his acting, be keeping to himself? Was it something about the movie, something about his life, or maybe something he felt nobody would understand? That word alone makes you want to dig deeper because it promises a mystery, a piece of the puzzle that has not been shown yet. Think about what unspoken really means in a story like this. It is not just about not talking, it is about choosing to stay quiet on purpose. Paul Winfield was not the kind of guy who seemed to hide much when he was on screen. He was raw and real in a way that made you believe every word he said. But now you hear there was something he did not share, something he kept locked away, and that makes you wonder why. Was it because it hurt too much to talk about, or because he thought nobody would get it? Maybe it was something so personal, so close to his heart, that he felt it was just for him and nobody else. The unspoken part makes you think about what was going on in his life around the time of his last film. He passed away in 2004, so his final work was right at the end of his days. Was he sick and did not want to say anything? Or was there something about that last role that hit him hard, something that made him decide it was better left alone? The idea of something being unspoken also makes you think about the kind of man Paul Winfield was behind closed doors. He was pretty private for someone so famous. He did not do a lot of big interviews or spill his whole life out for the world to see. That makes this unspoken thing even more interesting because it fits with who he seemed to be, someone who kept his cards close. But what could have been so big, so heavy, that even a man used to keeping things quiet would not touch it? Maybe it was not just about the movie, maybe it was about how he was feeling at the end of his life. He had been through a lot by then. He lost his partner a few years before he died, and you wonder if that grief was still with him. Losing someone you love can make you see the world differently, and maybe that had something to do with why he stayed silent. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe the role itself brought up memories or feelings he did not want to share. The unspoken part also pulls you in because it makes you wonder what we missed out on by not hearing it. What if Paul Winfield had a story to tell about that last film, something that would have changed how we saw him or his work? Maybe there was a reason behind his silence, something that would make us go, "Oh, now I get it." You start imagining what it could be. Was the movie something he was ashamed of, or something he was really proud of but felt nobody else would understand? Or was it tied to how he felt about his career looking back on all those years of acting? The unspoken part makes you feel like there is a gap in the story, a blank space you want to fill in because it could hold the key to understanding him better. It is like finding a letter someone wrote but never sent. You cannot help but wonder what it said and why they kept it to themselves. There is also this sense of respect that comes with the word unspoken because it reminds you Paul Winfield had the right to keep things private if he wanted to. But at the same time it makes you so curious because you want to know what was behind that choice. Was he protecting someone else, or just himself? Did he think talking about it would change how people saw him, or did he just not have the energy to explain? The unspoken part feels like a door that is closed but not locked, and you want to push it open just a little to see what is on the other side. It makes you think about all the things we do not know about people, even the ones who seem so open. With Paul Winfield, it is extra gripping because he gave so much in his roles but held back something big at the end. What could it have been? That question keeps you hooked because it feels like the answer might be just out of reach, waiting for someone to find it and bring it into the light. The word truth in the title pulls you in like a magnet because it promises something real, something raw that might change everything you thought you knew. When you hear truth, you think of the real story, not the shiny surface stuff, but the deep down honest bits that people do not always share. With Paul Winfield, this word hits even harder because he was someone who seemed to live so authentically in his work. You watch him in films like Sounder, where he played a father with so much heart, or even in smaller parts where he still stole the scene, and you feel like he was showing you who he really was. So when you hear there is a truth about his last role that he did not speak about, it makes your ears perk up. What could that truth be? Was it something about the movie, something about how he felt at the end of his life, or something nobody ever guessed? That word alone makes you want to lean in closer because it feels like you are about to uncover a hidden gem, something that might make you see Paul Winfield in a whole new light. Truth is a heavy word. It carries weight because it suggests there is more to the story than what we got. Paul Winfield was not the kind of guy who seemed to hide much in his acting. He put so much of himself into every role that you felt like you were seeing the real him. But now you hear there was a truth he kept to himself about his last role, and that makes you wonder what it could be. Was it something big, something that would surprise everyone if it came out? Maybe it was not even about the film itself, maybe it was about what was going on in his life at the time. He passed away in 2004, not long after his last project, so you have to think about what that time was like for him. Was he feeling okay, or was he struggling with something he did not want to share? The truth part makes you think there might be an answer out there waiting to be found, something that would tie everything together and make sense of why he stayed quiet. The idea of a truth also makes you curious about what Paul Winfield might have been feeling in those final days. He had been acting for decades by then, starting back in the 1960s when it was not easy for a black man to get good roles in Hollywood. He worked hard, fought for every chance he got, and made a name for himself as someone who could do anything from drama to sci-fi, but all that hard work must have taken a toll, and you wonder if that had anything to do with this unspoken truth. Did he look back on his career and feel proud, or was there something he wished he had done differently? Maybe the truth was about how he felt about acting itself. Maybe he was tired of it by the end, or maybe he loved it more than ever but did not know how to say it. The truth part makes you want to know what was in his heart, what he really thought when nobody was around to hear it. There is also this sense of mystery that comes with the word truth because it makes you wonder why it stayed hidden. Was it something Paul Winfield thought nobody would understand, or was it something he felt was just for him? Maybe it was a truth about the last role itself, something about the story or the people he worked with that rubbed him the wrong way. Or maybe it was bigger than that. Maybe it was about his life, about how he saw himself after all those years in the spotlight. He was a private guy, not someone who spilled everything in interviews, so you have to think whatever this truth was, it meant a lot to him. Did he write it down somewhere or tell it to someone close? The truth part makes you feel like there is a missing piece out there, a key that could unlock a whole new side of his story, and you want to find it because it might change everything. The truth also makes you think about how Paul Winfield lived his life outside of his work. He was in a long relationship with a man named Charles Gillen who passed away a couple of years before Paul did, and you wonder how that loss hit him. Losing someone you love can make you see things differently, and maybe that had something to do with this truth he kept quiet about. Was he grieving when he worked on that last film? Did that role bring up feelings he did not want to face? The truth part pulls you in because it feels like it could be tied to something so personal, so real, that it would make you feel even closer to him. It is like finding a letter he wrote but never sent. You want to know what it says because it might show you a side of him nobody else got to see. That kind of thing keeps you hooked because it is not just about facts or dates, it is about a man's heart and what he held inside when the cameras were off. In a way, the truth part of this story is what keeps you coming back for more because it feels like there is always more to learn. What was Paul Winfield really thinking at the end of his life? Did he have regrets, or was he at peace with everything he had done? Maybe the truth was something simple, something small that meant the world to him but nobody else would have noticed. Or maybe it was something huge, something that would make us all sit up and say, wow, I never knew that. Either way, the truth part promises something deeper, something that goes beyond the surface, and that is what makes you want to keep digging. It is like chasing a shadow. You can see it but you cannot quite catch it, and that makes the hunt all the more exciting because you know when you find it, it will be worth it. The part about his in the title pulls you in because it makes the whole thing feel so personal, like you are stepping into Paul Winfield's own world. It is not just a story or a secret, it is about him, something tied to who he was deep down. When you hear about his unspoken truth, it makes you think about the man behind the roles, the real person who lived through all the ups and downs of fame. Paul Winfield was someone who brought so much feeling to his work. Whether he was playing a struggling dad in Sounder or a tough cop in The Terminator, you could always feel his heart in it. So when you hear there is something unspoken tied to him, it makes you wonder what was going on in his life, what he was feeling that he did not let the world see. It is like getting a peek into his private thoughts, something he kept just for himself, and that alone makes you want to know more because it feels so close, so real. When you think about it brings up all kinds of questions about Paul Winfield's life, not just as an actor but as a man. He was born in 1939 in Los Angeles and grew up in a time when things were not easy for a black man trying to break into acting. He had to work harder than most just to get a foot in the door, and you wonder how that shaped him. Did he carry that fight with him every day, or did he find ways to let it go? His part makes you think about what he was like off screen when nobody was watching. Was he the kind of guy who laughed a lot, or did he keep to himself? He was pretty private for someone so famous, which makes this unspoken truth feel even more special because it is something tied to him, not the public version of him, but the real one. Maybe it was about how he saw himself after all those years in Hollywood, or maybe it was about something smaller, like a moment that meant the world to him but nobody else would have noticed. His part also makes you curious about what was happening in his life around the time of his last role. He passed away in 2004, so that final film was right at the end of his days. Was he feeling okay, or was he dealing with stuff he did not want to talk about? He had lost his partner Charles Gillen a couple of years before that, and you wonder how that hit him. Losing someone you love can change everything, and maybe that had something to do with this unspoken truth. His makes it feel like it is tied to his heart, to what he was going through when he worked on that last project. Did he take the role because it meant something special to him, or because he just needed to keep going? It is like trying to guess what was in his mind, what was driving him at the end, and that pulls you in because it feels so human, so raw. There is also this sense of closeness that comes with the word his, because it makes you feel like you are getting to know Paul Winfield in a new way. You start thinking about the little things that made him who he was. What did he love to do when he was not acting? Did he have hobbies or places he liked to go to clear his head? Maybe he was the kind of guy who loved sitting by the ocean or reading a good book, something simple that brought him peace. His part makes you want to know those details because they help paint a picture of the man, not just the star. And when you tie that to an unspoken truth, it makes you wonder if those little things had anything to do with why he stayed quiet. Maybe there was something in his life, a memory or a feeling that came up during that last role, something he did not want to share because it was too personal, too close to his heart. His part also makes you think about how Paul Winfield handled all the stuff that came with being famous. He broke barriers in Hollywood at a time when roles for black actors were hard to come by, and that must have been a lot to carry. Did he feel proud of what he did, or was there a part of him that wished things had been easier? His makes you think about his journey, not just the wins like his Oscar nomination for Sounder, but the tough times too. Maybe this unspoken truth was tied to how he felt about his career looking back on it all. Did he think he had done enough, or was there something he still wanted to say? It is like trying to see the world through his eyes for a moment, and that makes you want to keep digging because you feel like you are getting closer to understanding him, not just as an actor but as a person who lived a full, messy, beautiful life. In a way, his part is what keeps this story so gripping, because it reminds you this is about a real man, not just a name or a character. It makes you wonder what he would say if he were here, what he would tell us about that last role, if he decided to speak up. Was it something he loved, something he hated, or something that just hit him too hard to talk about? His pulls you in because it feels like an invitation to know him better, to see past the movies and the awards and find the truth of who he was. It is like sitting down with an old friend who has a story to tell but only gives you pieces, leaving you to figure out the rest, and that kind of thing keeps you hooked because you want to know the whole picture, every little bit of it. The part about his last role in the title grabs you because it points straight to the end of Paul Winfield's journey, a moment that feels heavy with meaning. When you hear last role, you cannot help but think about how final it sounds, like the closing chapter of a book you do not want to end. Paul Winfield was an actor who gave so much to every part he played, from big films like Sounder to smaller ones where he still left a mark. So when you hear there is an unspoken truth tied to his last role, it makes your heart skip a beat. What could have been so big, so personal, that he did not want to talk about it? Was it the role itself, the story, the people he worked with, or something deeper going on in his life? That phrase pulls you in because it feels like there is a mystery waiting to be unraveled, something that might show you a side of him you never knew before, and you want to know what it is because it feels like it could be the key to understanding him better. The last role part makes you think about where Paul Winfield was in his life when he took on that final project. He passed away in 2004, so this role came right at the end, when he might have been looking back on everything he had done. He had been acting for decades by then, starting in the 1960s, when it was tough for a black man to get good parts in Hollywood. He fought hard, broke barriers, and made a name for himself as someone who could do anything. But by the time he got to his last role, you have to wonder what he was feeling. Was he tired or still hungry for more? Did he pick that role because it meant something special to him, or because it was just another job? The last role part makes you curious about what that project was, and why it might have been different from everything else he did. Maybe it brought up memories or feelings he did not expect, or maybe it was something he knew would be his last, and that made it harder to talk about. There is also this sense of weight that comes with the idea of a last role because it feels like the end of a long road. Paul Winfield had been through so much in his career, from getting nominated for an Oscar to working with big names in movies and TV. He was known for his quiet strength, the way he could say so much with just a look. So when you hear about his last role, you wonder what he brought to it, how he played it, knowing it might be his final time in front of a camera. Did he pour everything he had into it, or was it just another day at work for him, and why did he not want to talk about it? That question keeps you hooked, because it feels like there is something behind it, something more than just a movie. Maybe the role hit too close to home, or maybe it made him think about his life in a way he was not ready to share with the world. The last role also makes you wonder what the project even was, and what it meant to him. Paul Winfield's final film was a small part in a movie that came out around the time he passed away, but he did not do much press for it, which was not like him. He was not the kind of guy who bragged a lot, but he usually had something to say about his work. So why the silence this time? Was there something about the story that got under his skin? Maybe it was a role that made him face things he had been avoiding, or maybe it was just bad timing with everything else going on in his life. He had lost his partner a few years before, and you wonder if he was still carrying that grief when he stepped onto that set. The last role part makes you want to know more about what he was going through, what he was thinking when he said yes to that part, because it feels like it could hold the answer to why he kept quiet. There is also this pull to the last role because it makes you think about endings and what they mean. For an actor like Paul Winfield, every role was a chance to tell a story, to show a piece of himself to the world. So what did he want to say with his last one? Was it something he was proud of, or something he wished he had skipped? The fact that he did not talk about it makes you feel like there might be more to it than just another job. Maybe it brought up old memories, or made him think about his own life in a new way. Or maybe it was just hard for him to talk about because he knew it might be the end. The last role part feels like a door you want to open because behind it could be a truth that ties his whole story together, a final piece of the puzzle that shows you who he was when the curtain came down. In a way, the last role part keeps you hooked because it feels like a turning point, a moment where everything might have come together or fallen apart. What was Paul Winfield thinking when he took that role? Did he know it would be his last, or was it just another step in a journey he thought would keep going? The silence around it makes you want to dig deeper to find out what was behind his choice to stay quiet. It is like hearing the last note of a song and wondering why it ended there, what the musician was feeling when they played it. That kind of mystery pulls you in because it is not just about a movie or a job, it is about a man's life, his heart, and what he chose to leave unsaid at the very end. The part about the silence in the title wraps everything up with a heavy kind of mystery that makes you sit up and pay attention. When you hear silence, you think of something deliberate, something chosen, not just an accident or a passing thing. With Paul Winfield, this word hits hard because he was a man who spoke so powerfully through his work. You watch him in movies like Sounder or even in smaller roles, and his voice, his presence, they filled the room. So when you hear about a silence tied to his last role, it feels like a big deal. Why would someone who could say so much without even speaking choose to say nothing at all? That question alone grabs you because it feels like there is something heavy behind it, something he wanted to keep just for himself. The silence makes you wonder what was going on in his mind, what could have been so big or so personal that he decided to hold it back, and it pulls you in because you want to know what lies beneath that quiet. The silence part makes you think about why Paul Winfield might have made that choice. He passed away in 2004, so this last role came right at the end of his life, a time when people often look back on everything they have done. He had been acting for decades by then, starting in the 1960s when it was not easy for a black man to get good roles in Hollywood. He fought hard, broke barriers, and left a mark with every part he played. But at the end, when it came to this final film, he stayed quiet, and you have to wonder why. Was it because he was tired of talking about his work, or because this role was different somehow? Maybe it brought up feelings he did not want to share, or maybe he just did not have the energy to explain. The silence feels like a wall he put up, and you want to peek over it to see what was on the other side, because it could be the key to understanding him in a whole new way. There is also this weight to the silence that makes you think about what was going on in his life at the time. Paul Winfield had been through a lot by 2004. He lost his partner Charles Gillen a couple of years before, and you wonder how that grief was sitting with him. Losing someone you love can make you go quiet, can make you turn inward, and maybe that had something to do with why he did not talk about his last role. Or maybe it was something else entirely, maybe the role itself was hard for him to face. The silence makes you curious because it feels like it is hiding something important, something that might explain how he was feeling at the end of his days. Was he sick and did not want to say anything? Was he looking back on his career and feeling something he could not put into words? That kind of mystery keeps you hooked, because it is not just about what he did not say, it is about why he felt he had to keep it to himself. The silence also makes you wonder what we missed out on by not hearing his thoughts. Paul Winfield was someone who could tell a story with just a look. He did not need a lot of words to get his point across. So what could have been so big that even he did not want to touch it? Maybe there was something about that last role that hit him harder than he expected. Maybe it made him think about his own life, his own journey in a way that felt too raw to share. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe he just wanted to keep it for himself, like a memory you hold on to because it means too much to let go. The silence part feels like a missing chapter in his story, one you want to read because it might tell you something nobody else knows. It is like finding a blank page in a book and wondering what should have been written there, what words he might have chosen if he had decided to speak. There is also this respect you feel for the silence because it reminds you Paul Winfield had the right to keep things private if he wanted to. But at the same time it makes you so curious because you want to know what was behind it. Was he protecting someone else, or just himself? Did he think talking about it would change how people saw him, or was he just done explaining himself after all those years? The silence feels like a choice he made for a reason, and you want to understand that reason because it could show you a side of him nobody else got to see. Maybe it was about his health, maybe it was about his feelings, or maybe it was about the role itself, something in the story that stuck with him in a way he could not shake. The silence part pulls you in because it feels like there is a truth hiding there waiting for someone to find it, and you want to be the one to figure it out. In a way, the silence is what keeps this whole story alive because it leaves so much room for wondering. What was Paul Winfield thinking in those final days? Did he have regrets, or was he at peace with everything he had done? Maybe the silence was his way of saying goodbye, of stepping back and letting his work speak for itself. Or maybe it was something deeper, something he felt nobody would understand. Either way, it keeps you hooked because it feels like there is more to learn, more to uncover. It is like listening for a whisper in a quiet room. You know it is there, you just have to get close enough to hear it, and that kind of mystery makes you want to keep going until you find the answer.